Alrighty, in this video we're gonna take a look at how you can use a GitHub repository as a configuration provider for a .NET Core API. My name is Vasily Lenik and you are watching the .NET Architecture and Detailed Design series, where we are covering topics and best practices in software engineering. What's an external configuration? An external configuration is a design decision where you decide to keep your application settings inside a centralized repository, which is accessible over HTTP. Why would we use this approach? Basically, when you're running microservices and you have multiple instances of the same microservice, you want to ensure that the configurations are consistent across all instances. And for example, when a configuration changes, you apply the configuration to all your instances without downtime. This is where the configuration services usually come in, and if you're running right now on cloud on Azure or on Amazon, you might have heard of Azure App Config Service or the Amazon Parameter Store. However, what other alternatives do we have? In the past I've used Console, but using Console is a little bit of an overkill if you only use it for a configuration provider. It has so much more to offer in store. In this video, we're going to take a look at Spring Cloud Config, which is a lightweight alternative to Azure App Service or Amazon Parameter Store. So, setting up Spring Cloud Config is really straightforward. We only need a Docker Compose file, and we specify that we want the container name configurator, the image is Spring Cloud Config server, and basically as environment variable, you send your link to your GitHub repository. So I'm just gonna start the service. Right now, it will just connect to this set repository and pull all our configurations from there. Besides the Docker Compose file, over here I have an empty web API project with only the program.cs with the minimal API set up in here. To connect to our Spring Cloud Config, we're gonna use a NuGet package, which is called Stilto Extensions Configuration Config Service Core. Stilto is basically an open source project that provides us with a bunch of libraries for developing microservices based systems. And what we need to do is basically for the builder, says builder add config server, which will add our using statement up on top. Right now we should take a quick look at the configuration that we're gonna pull, and this is the one. So app configuration, inside we have an object with my app as a name and version, an array and a string, just for proof of concept sake. I'm gonna copy this structure in a separate class right now. So copy the name. Over here we're gonna add a class called app configuration. We will also need another class called application information. Inside we're gonna have a string called name and another int called version. We're gonna use this class over here to define a property which is called application information. We're gonna define an array of strings, which in our case will be configs, and another string, which in our case will be URL. This will be the configuration that we're gonna retrieve from the GitHub repository. And over here, specify builder, services, configure, specify that I want to configure the app configuration. And in here, specify that I want to use builder configuration, get section, and the name will be the same, app config. Now, besides all of that, we're gonna need this app endpoint, where we are just gonna retrieve our app configuration. With that in place, all we need to do is go to our app settings.json. Over here, specify that we want to configure our Spring. Now cloud and then config. And in here, we're gonna specify our Spring Cloud Config settings. The first setting that we want to specify is basically the name of the configuration, and in our case it will be application. By the way, the default configuration name is taken application, so if you have, for example, an alternative YAML, you will specify right now an alternative. But for now, let's go with application. Now, the next setting that we want to specify is URI. Again, this is a default value, so it will be everything all right if you omit these two configurations. Now comes the fun part. So we want to specify that we want to fail fast. And what this setting basically does is at the start of our application, it will throw an exception if we were not able to load the configurations. The next setting makes totally sense in this regard. So it's retry. And in our case, we want it to be enabled. Sorry for the typo there, so true. And it will basically retry to load the configuration with an exponential backoff. And with this, you're basically fine and ready to go. So if I choose right now to run the external configurations and run it in debug, and once everything is loaded, I can go to my browser, run localhost 7213, which is the port that the application is running right now. So we can see that we have application information. Up is my app, version 2.0, config 1, config 2, basically the configurations from over here. Now, what do we do if we want to reload those settings at runtime? We basically should go back to our application, stop it all, and over here specify the polling interval, which in our case is a timestamp, so I'm gonna have to specify it just like this, and debug the application once again. Now, if I added this file and change the version to 0.3, I'm gonna commit the changes to the main branch. I don't care for now. Wait a couple of seconds and then refresh the local host. If I go back right now and refresh this, you can see that the version has just updated to 0.3. Now, there is a catch here. The configuration will also reload if you health check your configurator. So in our app settings.json, I can stop the running application and specify over here that I want to have health configuration and I want to enable it over here. By the way, by default, it's also true. If for any reason you would want to reload the configuration based on some HTTP call, you could do that as well. So I'm gonna put over here a comma and go back to my external configuration NuGet packages, remove it all, and install Stilto Management Endpoint Core. I'm gonna install this small package right here. Now I'll have to go to program.cs and somewhere over here specify that I want my builder, add refresh actuator, and go back to my app settings. What the actuator will do is basically add an endpoint that I could use to reload the configuration. For the sake of speed, I'm gonna copy paste the management actuators settings. So we have management, endpoints, actuator, and expose the refresh actuator over there. I'm gonna go to the polling interval and set it over here to once every 5 minutes. So we don't have that refresh there by default. Disable the health endpoints and basically debug our solution. Now, if I refresh this, it's still on version 3. I'm gonna go to my file over here, specify that I want to edit it. I want version 4, commit the changes, yes. Going back to my API endpoint, it's still version 3. Copy the link, and over here I want to call the actuator refresh endpoint. And now if I go back to retrieving the settings, you can see that we are on version 4. So with that, we have our refresh, the manual refresh for the configuration in place. And that's the end of the video. If you like this kind of content, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell down below so you get notified whenever a new video comes out. And with that, see you next time.